the police were never supposed to be and are not supposed to be the servants of government. We're supposed to be the servants of the people, and we're answerable to the law.
Hello, Australia. Welcome to ANR News. This is the Raw Report. I'm Ryan Jackson-Saw. For the last 2 years, Australia has been put under a veil of chaos from the coronavirus, the new laws and legislations. We've seen businesses closed. We've seen people lose their jobs, nurses who have lost their positions. We've seen people from Coles and Woolies being fired en masse. And even our police force has been affected. We have one such police officer here today with us. This is Roland Chrystal. Roland has been a police officer for the past 31 years and has recently left the force due to some moral obligation to no longer serve under unlawful regulations. Welcome, Roland.
Thanks very much, Ryan. I appreciate you having me on.
So tell us, why did you become a police officer? What was young Roland thinking when he joined up?
I don't think I can remember that far back, mate. I always wanted to be a police officer, I think, ever since I was a fetus. So it was just something that was going to happen. Look, I always had a desire to stick up for the underdog. I never liked people being bullied or threatened, or having their property or their rights affected.
I guess the question is, like, what exactly happened that made you reconsider being a part of the Australian Police Force?
Well, mate, I could see how society appeared to be under re-engineering, in my opinion. You know, we were seeing dramatic losses of basic human rights in the name of a pandemic, and yet we were having no global mortality increase. We were told the condition was 99% survival, but we had to shut down tourism. We had to destroy people's livelihoods. And it became very apparent that there were going to have to be people who were going to help implement these changes. So throughout history, we know that frontline workers are the ones that the authority relies upon to implement these changes. So when the requirement was brought out for police to enforce this public health orders and COVID legislation, I just declined to participate. The offer was there to go down to border enforcement, and I declined that. There was the offer to work in the hotels, the quarantines, I declined that. And even if I had people come up to me in the street when I'm in uniform and complain that someone wasn't wearing a mask, well, I just told them that I assumed they had an exemption and they should go about the business. So it wasn't sufficient for me to just not engage in enforcement, because the parameters by which I could do my job were narrow. I finished up my career with the State Crime Command Highway targeting organised crime, and it became apparent that if I didn't accept the offer of the jab, then I wouldn't even be able to leave the Sydney Metro to do my job. So it was quite clear that the job that I had done was no longer going to be available to me. And as I couldn't expect change from inside the organisation, and people really needed to hear a voice of experience, and it became apparent that my only option was to leave.
Well, it's quite admirable that you've chosen to step up, and really it is a leadership position that you've taken right now, to make that moral choice and to basically put the line in the sand. There's a growing concern in the major population that the health orders are in breach of federal law and in constitutional law. If you're given orders to go against federal law and to uphold the state health directives, were you given an opportunity to to basically raise your concerns, to say no to those without getting repercussions?
Look, every officer has the opportunity, and more than the opportunity, they have the obligation to raise issues through internal grievance procedures when they believe something is either unlawful or outside of our code of conduct or statement of values. How effective raising those concerns is where the issue lies. The mechanism is certainly there. I just don't think it's well supported. The other issue is an officer's knowledge of federal law through police training and even ongoing online training. There's not a great deal of instruction provided in relation to federal law. We are trained that where there is a dispute between state and federal, that the federal overrides state legislation. But really beyond that, prior to my leaving in late July, there was certainly no information that I recall indicating that there may have been a conflict between state and federal. All that was pushed upon the officers was to go out and enforce the state regulations, the public health orders.
Right. So basically the training is they pull you guys into the office and they say, these are the new health directives. You're being asked to enforce them, and you're not being, there's no open discussion about when they conflict with certain other laws that are already in place.
No, there's not. And look, you wouldn't expect there to be that sort of thing. When you have an organisation such as military or police, you all need to be on the same page. So you all need to be heading along the same mission path. You cannot have, you can't provide officers with multiple options as to whether or not they want to enforce one statute or another. But what it comes down to is the officer on the street has a reasonable expectation that the directives that come down from the chain of command will make both legal and moral good sense, and that they shouldn't have to stop and first challenge those directives and research the validity of them. They should be able to assume that that those directives are correct, and that's, I think, where a lot of officers are coming unstuck, for want of a better term, in that the opportunity or the time to just blindly accept what you're told, that time has passed, and you've actually got to start thinking independently and start looking at information on a broader scale.
What are your thoughts on the CHO directives?
Look, directives, to my understanding, they are not of the same validity and strength as law that's passed through Parliament, and you get statutes which are state laws, and then you get federal laws which, as I said before, override state. So the hierarchy of rules and legislation and so on. There's a lot of discussion as to whether or not the public health orders have been done in such a way by the right people under the right circumstances. That's, I guess, for the legal minds in terms of that sort of legislation to really be working through. And that's actually where we need human rights minded lawyers to come together and step up and to start putting aside the fear and the anxiety of taking on this task, and to actually knuckle down and work through these issues together. I can only really speak from a street level law enforcement aspect, and that relates to, you know, the use of your discretion, certainly also the application of force, and complying with what you're legislated to comply with, which is your statement of values. And they're very clear. And you know, Section 7 of the Police Act of 1990 is where we derive our statement of values, and they're very clear that they are underpinning legislation that governs our conduct as New South Wales Police, and it's every employee. It also tells us that that legislation is the measure by which the public will judge our conduct. So it's very strong, it's very clear, And if an officer reads that statement of values and then can still go out and actively want to shut down someone's basic right to put food on the table, their basic right to strive for the maintenance of just their human rights, to feed and look after their family. If an officer can read that statement of values and then go and take aggressive, draconian enforcement, then that's of concern.
So it's, every police officer swears an oath when they join the force. Do you think that with what's been happening over the past 2 years, you could say that many of the police officers are actually in breach of their oath?
Really, apart from their oath, it's more about. I mean, their oath is to act without fear or favour and to maintain the peace. So a police officer really is a peace officer. A much clearer guide, as I've said, is the statement of values and also the code of conduct and ethics. And both of those are public documents. They're online. You can research those. The New South Wales Police Force Code of Conduct and Ethics, and as I say, the statement of values. Have a read of those, and then you can use those as a measure by which to assess the way the police in the community are behaving. But look, no officer goes out with the intent to go out and breach those codes. As I say, you've got a lot of officers out there who have not turned their mind to federal legislation. And what we're talking about there, of course, is the Biosecurity Act of 2015. And that legislation deals directly with a pandemic. And it has a great number of safeguards built into it. So, for instance, if a person is suspected on reasonable grounds of being infected with a known human disease, they're to be served an individual notice if they're to lose any of their basic privileges. Now, we don't have individual notices being served on people. We're having mandates across an LGA or across a whole city or a state. When people under the Biosecurity Act are served a notice, they have a right to appeal whatever restriction before a court. Now, again, we don't have that safeguard. And so if we are going to lock healthy people in their homes and we're going to cause them to close their businesses, so we're destroying the middle class and private enterprise, these are massive draconian losses of most basic of human rights. We'd want to be making sure that, and I, as a police officer, if I was still serving, I'd want to be making very sure that if I were taking such harsh action against members of my community who are ordinarily law-abiding, supportive members of the community, if I'm going to go and take such action as to drastically affect their livelihoods, I'm going to want to make sure I'm on very solid ground and that the reason for doing so is highly appropriate.
A lot of Australian citizens right now are extremely distressed. They feel that if they're unvaccinated, they're automatically assumed to be criminals and almost treated as such because of these health directives. Do you feel that there's been a change in the wind? Do you think that these laws are being slowly peeled back so that people that are unvaccinated are less at risk from being harassed or hassled or arrested or fined?
I haven't seen that. I haven't seen any evidence of that. We just had apparently former Premier Carr coming out and saying that the unvaccinated should lose their Medicare rights. What country is this? I wake up like everyone does who shares these concerns. You wake up and you look around and you think, oh, shit, it wasn't a dream. We are in this society that has just been turned on its head. What kind of civilized society would be withdrawing basic medical?
Just lost your mic again there, Roland.
In a medical experiment.
It's a very big concern. I think that I'm worried. I'm very worried. Sorry, I have to try and keep focus here because I've been kind of stressing out for the past few weeks. and it's affecting a lot of people's health. What's happening right now when you're really paying attention to what's happening. Do you have any thoughts on the camps that are being built? Did you receive any directions or training about those?
No, they seem to be Victorian and Queensland, to my understanding. And of course, I've read a bit about them and heard the rumours that of their purpose. And of course, we had the Queensland Premier Palaszczuk make certain comments. But look, anything you hear and see on the media, it's very difficult to ascertain the truthfulness and the context. But I think that is something that, ordinary everyday citizens can start making some noise about. They can start writing. Don't just email. An email can be spammed or put in a junk box very easily. Start writing letters. Join peaceful protests and go and demand answers from your members of parliament and from your senators and so on, and start making some noise, because it's fine for me to get up and put myself out there on the public stage, which I had absolutely no desire or intention to do. And it's fine for yourself, Ryan, as well, to be doing this, and the various other people. But if 98% of the community are going to sit back and wait for Aquaman to ride in on that wave and save them, well, that's just not going to happen. So people need to give themselves an uppercut, get out and start making some noise and demand of their parliamentarians some answers. Now's the time.
Well, in a couple of days' time, the upper house is about to be voting on passing new legislation for amendments to the Biosecurity Act, which gives certain members of parliament, and it's a precedent. So while it's only affecting Victoria now, this may spread to other states. The power to lock down the state at any time, to declare entire groups of people, like you're mentioning with the Biosecurity Act, with a single letter, they can classify an entire group now as under these new legislations and restrictions. What do you think is the best way to approach these MPs with your concerns about that?
Look, it really requires a grassroots solution, which is everybody getting involved. And when people are living in fear, it shuts them down, and that's the intention of causing fear. I mean, I can remember back over the years when I used to think that the media had any validity. We'd hear that the Amazon was burning and it'd be gone, the ice caps would be gone, the Pacific Islands would be underwater, a meteorite was going to come in and take us out, the sun was going to burn out, the moon was floating away, whatever. You know what I mean? So constant fear porn. And the whole purpose of fear is to lock you down into a state where you just want to go and crawl under the bed and hope someone else does something. People have to realise that's state of mind, and either you accept that state of mind or you don't, and you rise above fear. Fear can be of benefit to you. If I threw a cricket ball at your face, and if for that split second you felt fear, but it motivated you to actually do something and get out of the way of that ball or catch it, then fear served you well. But the benefit of fear is very short-lived. If it doesn't motivate you to step into action and to start communicating and coordinating and getting involved, if it doesn't motivate you, then fear is very damaging. And so I'd encourage people to start to look at groups. Whilst I'm not aligned with any political group, you can look at things such as the Australia Project, look at any of the minor parties. You can get onto Telegram, which is a much safer platform where you can start to research what community groups are doing and what action they're taking, and start to get involved. ReReclaim the Lion, for instance.
So yeah, ReReclaim the Lion. Do you want to tell us a bit about that group?
Yeah, so ReReclaim the Lion, we just had a very successful bunch of peaceful protests in major cities. I was up at Tweed with Hoodie, everyone's favourite ex-Qantas pilot, and Alex Cooney, a former New South Wales police officer as well, who spearheaded the release of information. We all know Alex and appreciate his efforts. And various other people who basically just come together to hold a space for each other and to share information and to share goodwill and to indicate to the authorities and to the rest of the community that that there's a line that should not be crossed, and we need unity. As has been said by some other wise people, you cannot have community without unity. And so the whole narrative that we're fed through politicians, mainstream politicians, through the media, is about division. It's about apartheid. It's about pulling down the things that keep us strong. So Reunite the Lion is about unity.
Oh, that's absolutely, what a wonderful initiative. We're seeing
Yeah, absolutely.
big movements happening within our own communities in Australia, places that you wouldn't expect it, places like Coolangatta, Brisbane, we've seen in Sydney and Melbourne, huge big groups of people coming together right now and unifying. Have you been receiving a lot of support from people since you've come out and left the force?
Yeah, look, I have, I'd say 99.8% of it's been absolutely fantastic. There's always a couple of loose cannons who want to fire off a couple of thoughtless comments, but look, that's to be expected too. And as I've received a lot less negativity than I had been expecting. So the community has been very receptive, and I would also say I try to respond as much as I can to your comments, and I really appreciate them. But I just can't get to everyone. But I do try and read everything.
Wonderful. Is there a bit of a culture of change happening within the police ranks that you've seen while you were there? Was there a lot of communication happening between officers, or at least some?
Difficult to say. I believe there is a stronger movement in Queensland for some reason. Maybe it's the sunshine and the reduced amount of fluoride in the water, who knows? But I'm very proud of my Queensland colleagues. It was difficult to say with New South Wales because I was moving from a squad that was not required to do any COVID enforcement. In the State Crime Command, in the Highway Patrol there, we're targeting organised crime. And I've got to say that squad, for the most part, does an absolutely awesome job. Very committed, very dedicated officers there who are not required or weren't required at that stage to do COVID enforcement. It was only that I took a brief 3-month secondment back into normal Highway Patrol duties, just as a refresher, that put me into the duties of enforcement of COVID. So moving between the squads and not really knowing the staff too well in my new location, it's difficult to gauge where they're at, other than to say that obviously a very high rate of acceptance of the vaccine amongst my colleagues would indicate, I guess, there weren't that many people sharing my mindset, although I do know a great number of the officers accepted that offer under coercion, which is completely against what Prime Minister Morrison indicated when he stood up and indicated what a fine country Australia is and how we don't participate in that coercion. And right beneath his watch, it's happening. So yeah, many of the officers accepted that, but it was under coercion.
What do you think is going to happen to the culture of the police force? So you have a lot of police officers who are obviously very morally upright. You've seen the breaches of people's rights, and so you have left. But the police officers who remain, do you think that's going to create a different kind of police force?
I think we're going to see a different society all around, and the police are not going to be immune from that. Yeah, so we're seeing changes right across the community. All frontline sectors are being damaged, and it would appear quite clear that experience, wealth of knowledge, and so on is inconsequential. I received my 10, my 15, 20 and 25 year service was both for service to the state and national service, various commendations, awards, folder full of just letters of appreciation. All that means nothing under the demand to participate in the jab. So if I can go with 30 odd years, three decades of devotion to the job, and the commissioner can just throw me aside, and anyone else and tell us that we're going to be disciplined and most likely just for non-compliance, you have a dramatic effect upon the knowledge base, the experience base, and what's going to be left behind, yes, is going to be a very different police force. And so it's going to be different across all industries.
What do you think would need to change within the police force for you to ever consider going back?
Well, I think we need to look at the separation of powers. The police were never supposed to be and are not supposed to be the servants of government. We're supposed to be the servants of the people, and we're answerable to the law. Yet it appears that through the current management that that's not the case. And for people to have confidence in their police, they have to see an ongoing pattern of conduct from the police that warrants that trust. And what a lot of officers probably need to be reminded of is that we police the community by consent, and how important that consent is. So with how many millions got in New South Wales, 8 million people, 11 million, I don't know. We've only got 15 odd, 17 odd thousand police. So they don't have the compliant consent of the absolute vast majority of the community. Then we couldn't police this state just on sheer numbers. And so we're really only ordinarily policing a very small number of the community who don't consent and who don't comply with the basic laws that we need to have an ordered society. But that consent is based upon the fact that policing is done in a reasonable, responsible and ethical manner. And that's what my colleagues, my former colleagues, need to realise, that if they want to be able to continue to do their job and to continue to have any support from the public, well, the public need to see you acting in a way that warrants that support.
Are the police unions helping at all with the officers like yourself who don't want to take the jabs and they don't want to enforce health directives? They want to stick to law. Is there any support there at all?
Absolutely not. No, the Police Association has been an absolute disgrace, in my opinion. I paid into that for more than 3 decades, and the only time I've really required their assistance, it was not forthcoming. So I know many officers have been absolutely gutted by the lack of support, and I believe there are similar experiences across all states to varying degrees, and even we've heard the same with most of the unions. So these bodies that are set up to represent the workers and to assist them in this time of need seem to have all fallen aside and fallen into line.
What would happen if, like, say, 60% of the police officers across the country all stood together and said no, and force a union to represent them and say, we don't want to carry out these orders anymore? Wouldn't this whole pandemic issue be over overnight?
I don't know if it would be over. And I can't actually see, unfortunately, I can't see that happening or anything close to that. But what I can see happening is that if enough officers just listen to the message that I've already given, and that is, look, we obviously don't want them to resign. We need the police in the community. And it's fine for them to turn up to any situation that they're called up to deal with. But it's a manner in which they go about dealing with that situation that is the key. It's grassroots for every officer. Every officer has discretion, and they all have original authority, which means regardless of what your commander, your sergeant or your inspector tells you to do, they cannot direct you to commence enforcement action. All right, that's where you have original authority. And if you don't act when you must, then that's a neglected duty. So we're not calling for people to neglect their duty. What we're calling for them is to abide by the statement of values and to exercise authority responsibly, to uphold rights and freedoms. That's all. And so when you turn up, as I've said on other platforms and interviews, you don't have to win at all costs. You know, sometimes just mere contact and presence is sufficient. And even if you don't get compliance, you have to look at the seriousness of the offence before you start going hands-on with people and putting ordinarily law-abiding citizens on the ground. These sort of tactics where we're going hands-on and forcing people onto the ground and potentially injuring themselves or even injuring the officer, any sort of interaction like that is risky. And that risk needs to be weighed up against the seriousness of the offence. And so I'm calling on my colleagues that when they go to these jobs, use your discretion, use your brain, think about what you're looking at here. What is the nature of this offence? It's a public health order. There is overriding federal legislation which is being ignored here. Yes, I'll go and I'll speak to the people, but do I have to force compliance? Do I have to take things to the highest level? And many times, the majority of times, no, you don't. I think people need to do a few things. Firstly, as I've said before, and many people have said, you've got to turn the mainstream media garbage off. Just turn it off. It does not ever feed you a balanced view. You know, if I were to prosecute a matter before a judge or a magistrate and I ignored half the evidence and the defence came in and said, you didn't speak to our witness, you didn't consider this, I couldn't just say to the judge, don't worry about it, judge. I'm only presenting you half the case. I want you to prosecute on that. You know, that's where you get costs of water against you and the matter thrown out, and you have failed prosecutions and so on. So if people are going to prosecute this matter, if they're going to investigate this matter by sitting down in front of Channel 9, Channel 7, and whatever, mainstream media garbage, then they are going to have no truth, no balance. They need to get onto something like Telegram and have a look at the COVID Medical Network, which is the Australian doctors, or the World Doctor Alliance, American Frontline Doctors, all of these sites where you can check out the credentials of these doctors. You know, they're not hiding anything. They have everything referenced. And this is the information you're not getting from the mainstream media. So my message is do your research. And this is not about if you want the jab. If you had 1, 2, or if you're looking for your third, or, you know, booking in your fourth. If you're going to get it, that's fine. But first, do your research. And before you queue your 17-year-old up or your younger before a vaccination hub, for goodness sake, have a look at what's happening to kids in America with myocarditis. Do some valid, independent research.
I'm going to give the listeners a bit of a heads up right now. Over in Europe, most of the European countries tend to be banning a lot of the vaccines for under 30-year-olds, including Moderna. Yet over here, they're pushing for Australia to do trials for 6-month-old babies, which is extremely dangerous. We really need to get on top of that one and put a big no right in front of that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you know, the line in the sand should have been sovereignty over our own bodies. That's where it should have been. It should not have gone past that. But now when they're coming after the kids, my goodness me, they surely are going to be poking Mother Bear and Father Bear in a way that is intolerable. For anyone who just, you know,
maybe they want us to rile up, you know, maybe they want us to get in the streets, maybe they want us to be violent.
There is certainly that suggestion that that they want to create chaos, but that's why at things such as Reclaim the Lion, we are there about peace. And while we're on that point, I'll just show you my shirt there, Ryan. So Police for Freedom, New South Wales chapter.
Mm.
Policeforfreedom.org is an international organisation started in Spain, and it's an organisation that is there to be a liaison between police and the community to help maintain that positive relationship. So for officers who see policeforfreedom.org, don't be threatened by it. We're not police officers as such. We're either former police or pro-police members of the community who want to try and maintain that liaison. And we're an organisation that is growing. We're in, I think 16 countries now.
Mm. What supports networks? You got them obviously. What other networks are available for police officers thinking about making the moral choice and leaving their positions right now? What can they expect when they come out?
Yep. Well, I think they can expect a great deal of public support and gratitude. There will always be members of the public who will remain based in negativity and anger and hate. That's not going to get us anywhere, but the vast majority of the public will welcome any officer who decides to stand with them. Those officers can always get onto Telegram and go to Cops for COVID Truth. That is a site that was started by Alex Cooney, and it has valid information there that'll assist them to understand their lawful obligations from a different perspective from what they get from the department. So there's support there. And as you say, policeforfreedom.org, and just your basic community is going to welcome you, because police, look, I don't really want to see officers leave because we obviously need police. I just want them to examine their attitude, examine the information they're getting, and challenge themselves, and get them to come back to community, get them to come back to their rightful place where their noble careers, they're living up to that career and that expectation.
The public perception of the Australian police force has changed quite a lot over the past couple of years. They've been getting quite a lot of, I guess, people are seeing them in a very negative light now, because we're seeing a lot of filming of stuff happening in Melbourne and Sydney, a lot of heavy-handed tactics. What do you think that would be necessary to get some, basically win back that public support for the Australian police force?
Well, we saw it on ReReclaim the Lion. We saw some very approachable officers. We did not see a heavy-handed presence of police. And look, having worked in the gang squad, there is a time and a place for the overuse of police resources. And sometimes it's a very good thing. You know, if you're going into with a gang such as a bikie gang and they're there en masse, well, you want to meet that force. But even having said that, we still acknowledge the basic humanity of these gang members. You know, I didn't see my colleagues treat those gang members in the way that some members of the public are being treated at these protests. No matter who you deal with, what their mindset is, their criminality, their purpose, they're still fellow Australians, and they still have a human value. And so every officer has to still be mindful of the fact that your use of discretion and your use of force must be appropriate, and it must still acknowledge the value of every single person in this community. And so we saw at Reunite the Lion, officers there were open to the greetings of the public, and it was a good thing to see. So if police can just stand down from the perception of the need to be a draconian force when they're meeting peaceful members of the community, I think that's half the battle. And I think we're seeing that.
Do you think we'll ever see incidents like we're seeing over in some parts of Europe, where the police officers, rather than attacking crowds of protesters, are taking off their helmets and standing peacefully with them?
We can only hope. There's certainly the opportunity for it. And look, there is nothing wrong with that if you have a peaceful gathering. to at least step down your level of aggression. I would never condone to see police officers going down on one knee. I don't agree with any of that sort of rubbish. I don't agree with any of the divisive groups, be they BLM, be they anything else, because every life matters. Every life is equal. Every life is of extreme value. And an officer is, when he takes off that shield, when he takes off that badge, he slips back into that very same community.
Mm.
So he is the community and she is the community. And they have to remember that. Their kids go to the same school. They go to the same shops. So yes, if you can step down from violent confrontation, if you can even step down from a combative stance when you can see that there is no substantial threat. Officers in these squads, they're well trained. They don't just turn up on their first day and get given a shield and a helmet. They assess the crowd, they assess the risk. And most of the time you can tell that that risk is very minimal. Certainly when you get those groups coming through that are agent provocateurs, that are there to cause violence, I'd encourage those officers to go hard and put those grubs down fast. But that's what the rest of the public wants as well. But that's not 99% of who's there. It's a very small group that are looking for that sort of trouble. But for the rest, hold a space of safety for your fellow community members that are looking after your rights as well.
Well, I'd like to see definitely police officers treat protesters like they would their own grown-up children, because that's essentially what's happening. How the police force act towards the public is how they're creating the environment that their children are raised in. We'd like to thank you very, very much, Rolando. Is there any last message you have for our listeners today before we go?
Just try your best to step out of fear. Okay, fear will lock you down. It's a concerning time for us all. We are a nation in distress. As I have said previous times, I believe now is a very good time for you to improve your spiritual walk. If you have any sort of faith or belief in something other than the mainstream media, it's time for you to start to dig a little bit deeper. But be part of your community, step out of fear and look after one another, and don't lose faith in your police.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your time, and God willing, we're going to see some very positive changes coming up in the next couple of years.
Hopefully sooner than that, mate.
Hopefully. Thank you.